284 Green Street, Enfield, North London. A modest council house, indistinguishable from its neighbors. Inside lived Peggy Hodgson, a single mother raising 4 children: Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. On the evening of August 30th, the routine chaos of bedtime was winding down. The children were brushing their teeth. Peggy was settling in for the night. And then, the knocking began. At first it was subtle, just taps, but then came the loud, rhythmic thuds on the walls, as if someone or something was knocking from inside them. Peggy assumed the children were playing tricks, but when a heavy chest of drawers slid across the floor on its own and wouldn't move back no matter how hard she pushed, panic set in. She grabbed the children and fled to the neighbor's house. They called the police, and the officers who arrived would later sign a sworn affidavit. They too witnessed a chair rise from the floor and move without explanation. In the days that followed, the disturbances intensified. Furniture began to slide across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. Beds trembled violently in the night, jolting the children awake. Objects vanished from one room and reappeared in another. Doors slammed shut with no one near them. The Hodgson home had become a place of unease and dread. But it was 11-year-old Janet who became the center of the storm. She began to experience episodes that terrified everyone. She would enter trances, speak in a guttural, rasping voice that didn't sound like her own. The voice claimed to be Bill Wilkins, an old man who had died in the house years before. He said he had gone blind and died while sitting in the living room. Neighbors started witnessing the events too. Knocking sounds echoed through the walls. Small objects, marbles, coins, Lego bricks would lift into the air and zip across rooms. Sometimes they struck people, and strangest of all, they were often reported to be hot to the touch immediately afterward. Janet was often thrown from her bed, not once, but repeatedly. Her mother, Peggy, and even visiting journalists claimed to see her levitate, hovering briefly several inches above the mattress before collapsing. Cameras would later capture a series of photos of her midair, arms outstretched, head back in apparent flight. It was becoming clear this wasn't just a frightened family's imagination. Something was happening at 284 Green Street, and word was beginning to spread. As the disturbances escalated, so did public curiosity. The Hodgsons, overwhelmed and terrified, reached out for help, not just from neighbors or police, but from anyone who would listen. Their cries did not go unanswered. The Daily Mirror newspaper dispatched journalists to the house. When they arrived, they reportedly witnessed phenomena themselves: objects flying, banging noises, and Janet entering trance-like states. A photographer managed to snap a sequence of images showing Janet seemingly midair above her bed. Soon after, the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, sent 2 of its most notable investigators: Maurice Gruss, an inventor and SPR member who had recently lost his daughter and was deeply sympathetic to the family, and Guy Lyon Playfair, a more skeptical yet experienced researcher. They would spend over a year documenting the case. Gross and Playfair installed recorders, cameras, and other equipment in the home. They interviewed family members, tracked the phenomena, and attempted to find rational explanations. What they found instead was a pattern of chilling consistency. Strange knocking sounds that seemed to respond to questions, items moving without human contact, and increasingly disturbing manifestations involving Janet. Word spread quickly, and the house at 284 Green Street became infamous. Locals gathered outside hoping to catch a glimpse. Television crews came and went, but behind the media frenzy, the Hodgsons were still just a family under siege. Over months of investigation, Gross and Playfair compiled an extensive archive of strange phenomena, some of it caught on tape, some photographed, and much of it witnessed in real time by outsiders. There were tapes in which raps and knocks seemed to answer direct questions. A code of one knock for yes, two for no was reportedly used in dozens of chilling sessions. Even more disturbing was Janet's voice while in trance, a deep, gravelly growl that claimed to be Bill Wilkins. Wilkins, the voice said, had died in the armchair downstairs. Gross later discovered that a man named Bill Wilkins had, in fact, died in the house under eerily similar circumstances. This was one of the few moments where the paranormal details aligned with verifiable public records. Photos taken by the Daily Mirror and others showed Janet midair, arms outstretched, knees bent, head flung back. Supporters called this evidence of levitation. Skeptics noted she may have simply jumped off the bed. But it wasn't just the photos. It was how frequently this levitation occurred, often under observation, and how violently Janet would sometimes be hurled from the bed without warning. Other reports included toys and marbles flying through the air, hot to the touch when picked up. Puddles of water appeared suddenly on the kitchen floor. Disembodied voices echoed through rooms with no one inside. And the voice of Bill Wilkins was once recorded speaking continuously, even while Janet's mouth was taped shut or filled with water, a test designed to rule out ventriloquism. Whether this was a supernatural force or something more explainable, the sheer quantity and consistency of the evidence made the case one of the most thoroughly documented hauntings in modern history. While the daily occurrences in the Hodgson household were disturbing enough, several moments stood out as particularly harrowing, so vivid and inexplicable that even hardened investigators were shaken. One evening, marbles and Lego bricks flew across the living room at incredible speed. A journalist from the Daily Mirror was hit in the face by a Lego piece. It left a red mark. He swore it had been hot to the touch, an observation echoed by multiple other witnesses over time. No one could explain how such small objects gained that kind of velocity or heat. On other nights, water puddles would appear spontaneously on the kitchen floor, with no source and no leak. The air in the home was frequently described as charged, tense, heavy, filled with a pressure that made breathing uneasy. Lights flickered, doors locked and unlocked themselves. But the most unsettling experiences centered on Janet. Witnesses reported that she would be physically thrown from her bed, her body contorted midair. Once, she was discovered wedged into a narrow gap between her bed and the wall, face down, unconscious, as if placed there deliberately. Another time, she appeared to be dragged up the stairs by an invisible force, screaming all the way. The voice that spoke through Janet, the so-called Bill Wilkins, would sometimes laugh, curse, or deliver bizarre monologues. On more than one occasion, it spoke for hours without pause, maintaining a tone and cadence far too deep and sustained for an 11-year-old girl. These sessions were recorded in full, and even skeptics acknowledged their unsettling authenticity. These weren't isolated tricks. They were relentless, escalating, and increasingly dangerous. Despite the wealth of eyewitness accounts and recordings, the Enfield case was never free from scrutiny. Skeptics, including members of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, formerly CSICOP, raised serious doubts about the authenticity of the phenomena. They argued that the girls, particularly Janet, were clever, attention-seeking children capable of faking much of what occurred. One photographer, for instance, captured a sequence of Janet's levitations that looked suspiciously like she was simply bouncing off the bed. Other critics pointed out that many of the most intense phenomena occurred when investigators were not present, and some even ceased when Janet was under strict supervision. Gross and Playfair themselves admitted that the girls may have occasionally exaggerated or staged minor events, what they called trickery, accounting for perhaps 1–2% of the activity. But they remained convinced the core of the case was genuine, citing moments where the events were simply too bizarre or physically impossible to explain as hoaxes. Janet and her sister Margaret later admitted to faking a few events during interviews as adults, but they both insisted that the majority of what happened was real, and that it was far too terrifying and uncontrollable to have been a game. As with many paranormal cases, the Enfield Poltergeist straddles the line between belief and doubt. Was it a cleverly executed child-led illusion that spiraled out of control? Or did investigators truly witness evidence of something that science has yet to explain? By 1979, the activity at 284 Green Street had largely tapered off. The voices stopped. The objects no longer flew. The Hodgsons, exhausted and wary of the spotlight, resumed a quieter life. But the family was never quite the same. Janet, who had been at the epicenter of the events, was sent to a psychiatric hospital for a short time due to the stress and trauma. Eventually, she moved away from Enfield. As an adult, she continued to affirm that the haunting was real. She admitted to faking a few events, but only to test the investigators. "If people want to believe it was all faked, that's up to them," she said in later interviews. But it wasn't. The case lived on in books, documentaries, and dramatizations. Most notably, it inspired The Conjuring 2, 2016, where Hollywood reimagined the Enfield Poltergeist with cinematic flair. Guy Lyon Playfair wrote "This House is Haunted," a detailed account defending the legitimacy of the events. To this day, paranormal researchers cite Enfield as one of the best documented hauntings in modern history. Skeptics still argue it was an elaborate hoax fueled by media attention and teenage mischief. Believers see it as a chilling example of true poltergeist activity, chaotic, violent, and beyond explanation. Whatever the truth, the Enfield Poltergeist remains a story that refuses to rest. In August 1978, American demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren visited 284 Green Street after hearing reports of the case. Ed Warren declared the haunting inhuman, suggesting demonic forces were at work, and performed prayers in the home. Maurice Grosse and Guy Playfair, however, felt the Warrens exaggerated events for publicity, and Playfair later wrote that their visit lasted only one day and added little to the investigation. The clash of approaches, religious demonology versus parapsychological fieldwork, sparked debate that still colors discussions of Enfield today. Decades on, the house remains a magnet for paranormal tourism, especially after The Conjuring 2, 2016. Neighbors have complained of daily door knocks, flashes from phone cameras, and Halloween crowds peering through windows. Some residents say the constant intrusion is driving them to move, proving that the haunting's legacy now affects the living more than any lingering spirit. Digital audio specialists have revisited Grosse's reel-to-reel tapes, analyzing frequency ranges of the Bill Wilkins voice. Preliminary studies suggest the sound originated from within Janet's vocal tract, yet the sustained gravelly pitch for over an hour remains physiologically difficult for a child, keeping the debate alive. High-resolution scans of the levitation photos reveal motion blur consistent with a rapid forward arc rather than a vertical lift, lending weight to skeptical arguments, though believers counter that multiple witnesses saw her rise without pushing off. Popular science outlets continue to frame Enfield as a case study in observer bias, familial stress, and media amplification. The Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most compelling and contentious hauntings in modern history. With more than a year of documentation, dozens of witnesses, and a case file that blends recorded evidence with first-hand terror, it has earned its place in the annals of paranormal lore. Was it an elaborate prank that spiraled into something uncontrollable? Or was it a genuine encounter with forces we still don't understand? The answer may never be clear. What is certain is that the events on Green Street continue to fascinate, unsettle, and divide believers and skeptics alike. Even decades later, the house still stands, ordinary from the outside. But for those who remember, or dare to believe, it's a place where the boundary between the natural and supernatural once broke down. What do you think? Hoax or haunting? Trick of the mind or true encounter with the unknown?